Hey YouTube, welcome back to our channel. My name is Elena.
And I'm Bjorn.
And we are Viking Age reenactors and living historians here to talk with you about your favorite Viking shows.
As our longtime viewers might have noticed, this week actually marks our 1-year anniversary for having this channel. Really excited to have made it this far, to keep going and have all of you here following us, so thank you so much for that. We started this channel by reviewing Season 6, Part A of Vikings, and it's only fitting that for our new year, we start with the series finale of Vikings.
So a couple of notes before we get started for our longer time viewers. You will notice that moving forward we have restructured our videos slightly to have a slightly different approach to our reactions and discussions regarding these shows. Also, warning, spoilers ahead. For those of you who have not watched Vikings yet, it is available on Amazon Prime. Go watch it before you join us for these reactions.
No, I won't sacrifice my ambitions. But they can wait. Then it is decided.
Have you seen him? He can't wait much
Let
longer.
the settlers choose amongst themselves who will come with us. And may the gods guide us to the Golden Land.
So Uba here is talking about a voyage to Golden Land. From what we can surmise, the Golden Land that they're talking about here is actually Vinland. It's North America, probably Canada coast. And they called it Vinland because when they reached here, they found an abundance of grapes. So Vinland actually equals wine land. So that's basically what they called it.
Right.
But then on top of that, they also did find wheat fields. So from a sighting of the land, because it doesn't seem like anyone actually landed there, they're just hearing stories about somebody sighting this land. They're calling it Golden Land, and it could be that they sighted some wheat fields, possibly, because that is also something that they found there.
Yeah, exactly. And like with the reflection of like the sunlight off the wheat stalks, basically it can kind of create that sense of like the golden landscape. Yeah, absolutely. We also know from the Greenlander sagas that those Vikings that actually did make it to Greenland noted that beyond just a whole plethora of grapes, there were also like rolling open grass fields filled with wild game. There were like towering timber trees. The rivers were filled and flushed with salmon. So this was just like the epitome of like a Viking wet dream.
Nice fertile land that didn't even I think it was explained that it didn't even like get frost in the winter.
Yeah, like the climate was so mild too that like it wasn't even as severe or harsh as they typically knew back home in Scandinavia. So by all intents and purposes, like it makes sense to call this land like the Golden Land,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it's so promising. It's like what could be wrong with it?
Who are these prisoners? This is King Olaf, once the ruler here. And this is King Harold, king of all of Norway.
Nothing more can hurt me. Not the thunder, nor the deep swell of the waves, nor yet the tongues of fire.
So this is supposed to be Olaf the Stout, and we know historically Olaf the Stout was actually very different person. So he was king of Norway in the early 11th century. He was a pious Christian. He was very all about his faith, and he was known for trying to spread Christianity kind of into more of the rural areas of Norway, and kind of take on that as like his champion cause. Did not die at all similarly to this in the least bit, even close at all.
Yep. This is very odd to me. So jumping out of Beforeigners and into this is such a stark difference in the way that they're portraying Olaf. Honestly, we didn't see a lot of Olaf in the Beforeigners yet.
But even still.
Yeah, so he died in battle. He was not burned to death.
He died at the Battle of Stiklestad by the hand of Tore Hund, among others.
Yep.
But yeah, so this is absolutely just historically, factually incorrect.
Yeah, I feel like his whole character is, and I remember us talking a little bit about it when we were watching the first half of the season. We were trying to figure out, is that Olaf the Stout? Because that seems nothing like him.
Yeah.
The thing that they did get right is the stout part. he was fat.
Yeah, and we don't even necessarily know if that was like stout or stout.
Yeah.
Because even in
Yeah,
Beforeigners, they
that's
took the
all.
whole different approach and just
Yeah.
made him this wicked big dude, and they were like, oh, that's why you call him stout.
No, I mean, I guess like my question would be if you're going to call upon such a well-known figure in Norwegian culture, or Norwegian history rather, why wouldn't you try to make him be that character? Because it seems like they just kind of wrote him as completely separate character from what he actually was.
Yeah, and that's always confused me about the show a lot too, because also of note, since we're on the topic, this is a descendant of Harold Fairhair.
So that's true.
Olaf the Stout is a direct descendant, like a great-great-great-grandchild or something like that, of Harold Fairhair. So, like, this is
like
just...
a family reunion
It's
right
just
now.
messing with me so much. And yeah, like, the whole episode is like a big family reunion with all these characters. And I don't understand, like, you could have just called him you could have just called him King Olaf. You didn't have to call him Olaf the Stout. You could have made up any other name. But you had to pick a historical character that's a direct descendant of the dude he's imprisoned with. It's absurd. It's so... Why? It's so... Why?
Yeah, Olaf's family is actually interesting. Yeah, he is a descendant of Harold Fairhair, and he is also a half brother. They share the same mother of Harold Hardrada.
Right.
So he has a pretty interesting family. Honestly.
Absolutely.
It would have been nice for them to explore a little bit of that. Granted, we do get a lot of merging storylines here. They're bringing characters from different centuries, basically, to try and fit them into the same mold. But again, if you're going to bring somebody like Olaf the Stout into a show, make him Olaf the Stout.
That's what I'm saying.
King Haakon.
Since we were already on the topic, there's not a lot of King Haakons from the Viking Age beyond Haakon the Good, who is, again, literally Harold Fairhair's son. So, like...
He's got his whole family there.
This is the whole family reunion.
I believe in the All-Father, the Father of all gods. And I believe that your God you recognize as the All-Father. I remember all the ceremonies of my six, and in all those ceremonies, your Christ reaches out and prays to the Holy Father.
So this conversation about Odin and the Christian God actually reminds me of the way that the end of Ragnarok was written.
Like, them talking about the gods kind of like being the same figure, basically. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, because in the past, so we've heard discussions like this with Ragnar and Athelstan about which god is which, or if there's same or some commonality. And right now, Ub is basically just saying that he thinks that like the god that Jesus was praying to all the time was the All-Father, like the father of all, the creator, and that being Odin All-Father. And that is an interesting point, because so in Ragnarok, or after Ragnarok, really what happens is some things survive, as we know, and one of these things is actually that it's not any of like the gods in particular necessarily, but there's like one soul uniting god deity kind of thing that decides to rule over all of creation basically after the fact. So it's basically like the whole story of after all the pagan gods die in Ragnarok, there's like a rebirth, and in that rebirth there's now one god only. It's got some strong Christian influence there.
Yeah. You have to remember that a lot of this stuff, or basically all of this stuff, was written
Centuries after the fact.
Yeah, centuries after the Viking Age ended, and it was written by people who were Christians. So in a way, it was their way of explaining that heathenry was a thing and Odin was a thing, but here's what happened afterwards. So we're post Ragnarok now, we're a Christian nation, and it was kind of their way of tying up those loose ends, which is like honestly incredibly poetic of them to do that.
Yeah, it really is, and it's very. I feel like it's very unique too, because a lot of the time when we see the Christianization of certain nations, it kind of in the past with these other examples, there it's always like, oh yeah, no, they were all wrong. That was all silly of them. This is the correct path. But what we see with the Norse stories and with Scandinavian culture is that they seem to really recognize and have like a really deep connection to their pagan past, and they're infatuated and interested in it in like a historical context. So that's why we get these stories of Odin being a person who creates the Yngling dynasty along with Freya and Freyr and stuff like that too. It's like they're making it a historical fact rather than like a mythology or like a religion. And as Snorri kind of did with his tellings of Ragnarok and everything, is that he's not denying that they were ever pagan, but he's articulating it in a certain way that makes it kind of okay to be like, oh yeah, you know, we used to be pagan and then Ragnarok happened and now we've all accepted the one God.
Yeah.
And it is like a very interesting and like you said, poetic kind of way to go about that approach, I guess.
There are some emerging theories when it comes to Ragnarok and the way that the Norse saw it, that it was really the end of everything. Because we've talked on the channel before, and there have been a lot of discussions around how the Norse saw the cycle of the gods as cyclical. You know, Ragnarok happens, and some of the gods survive, and new people are born, and the earth kind of continues rotating and doing its thing. And the world, the 9 realms still exist and everything like that. There is an emerging theory that's starting to come out that suggests that the tacking on of the one true God at the end of the mythology kind of points to the fact that the Norse really didn't see Ragnarok that way. They really saw it as the destruction of all of the worlds.
Yeah, it was just really like a final end.
Exactly.
And then Snorri kind of last minute was like, oh, and by the way, this happens! Like, oh, Jesus Christ! Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Why are you being so pathetic?
It's not just fear.
Then what?
King Harold raped me.
Yeesh.
Don't be afraid.
It's like weirdly nice of her to just like be there for.
Why are you so pathetic? Yeah, wicked nice.
Yeah, but then she was understanding and everything. First of all, I'm just gonna say that is a really sweet scene between his 2 wives and how they're kind of there for each other while he's battling for his life basically, and they're just kind of like looking out for each other and just being there.
Yeah, because like right now they don't really have anyone else.
Yeah.
You know, like they're both losing that person who's so fundamentally important to them. So
I
it's
know.
nice that they can like bond over this when they've had such like a rough relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, historically, we don't know much about his wives.
True.
We don't know anything at all about his wives.
Yep.
The only thing that we know of his family, aside from the fact that he was the son of Ragnar and had a lot of brothers, was that he had 2 sons, Eric and Bjorn. One was named after him.
Original.
Very. But that's the only thing that we have. So
Basically,
the
yeah.
wives here are, you know, purely made up, and it's kind of a nice hole to fill to at least explain, you know, some of the history that we don't know about him. And that's where the show takes pretty good creative license in that respect.
Definitely.
This is yours. My king.
A couple of other things about Bjorn here. So he is set up to be a king of Norway, up against, you know, none other than King Harold, who we know was the first king of Norway.
Yep.
From the sagas, from the stories that we know, he was actually a king of Sweden. And his family, after his sons, ruled Sweden into the 11th century.
Yep, exactly.
So this takes a lot of liberties with who he was as a historical person in that respect.
Yeah, and they kind of always have done that too with the show. You know, I understand from like a storytelling perspective where they're trying to, you know, kind of create this whole microcosm of their own kind of Viking thing with it all, and using these historical figures to basically do that. And they've done some really cool things with his travels into Spain, into the Mediterranean, which are nice. But yeah, they definitely don't seem too concerned with the historical Bjorn as opposed to their TV Vikings Bjorn. Yeah.
I told you, Ivar, you can't kill him. He's not a god. Neither are you.
So Bjorn led like a really interesting life. From what we know from the source material, he left Scandinavia relatively young because Ragnar wanted him to kind of make a name for himself, and he kind of had to prove himself as well. So he raided all throughout Scandinavia with this huge fleet. He went down into mainland Europe and traveled as far as, through the Frankish territories. He even was actually said to swear fealty at a time to Charles the Bald. Mm-hmm. We don't know if he kept that promise, but I mean, who knows? But afterwards, he was even cited as raiding parts of Spain, along the southern coast of France, into Italy even, and the Mediterranean. So he was all over the place. So kind of a funny story is that while he was in the south, he, along with his companion, Hestane, who might have been his foster father, we're not really sure, had this grand idea to install Bjorn as the new Roman emperor, just for fun. So, just because, when in Rome, you do as the Romans do and take over Rome? I don't know. So they literally raided this territory that they thought was Rome. They weren't even sure. It wasn't, point in case, but they took it over anyways, and then found out that the locals were kind of, like, prepared or, like, ready to fend them off and have like this long defense drawn out thing. So they were like, never mind. And they just up and left. After this point, the history that we know gets a little bit dicey. As part of his saga, we hear that Bjorn actually ends up going back to Scandinavia and then, rules Uppsala in Sweden and starts his dynasty that way. But there's also a chronicler at the time, William of Jumier, who says that after Bjorn was done in the south, he actually ended up dying in Frisia, which is, largely now modern day Netherlands, like around that region in the north along the coast. Mm-hmm. But we're not really sure what happened to him after that point. We are pretty sure, though, of his resting place, which is actually this lovely little burial mound in Münster in Sweden. Mm-hmm. So that's actually a touristy spot that you can go and visit. And if you ever get the chance, absolutely do so. I really want to. It's on my list of places to go. Sure. Yeah.
Bjorn Ironside was victorious, which is one reason his name will never be forgotten, nor will they ever cease to sing of his exploits.
To talk about his burial here, real unusual for it to be looking like that. Like that was like more of like a statue, taxidermy, weird thing. I don't know what was happening. Like the walls were all elaborately painted. Typically in like a burial mound like this, it would have been like a normal, like burial ceremony. Like he would have been placed there in a grave, possibly even in a boat. Mm-hmm. With all of these precious belongings and stuff, put it next to him, and then they would have, piled stones and dirt and soil and everything over him. It wouldn't have been necessarily this hollowed out, like, walk-in homestead where you can see him on full display. That's a little bit different.
Yeah, it wasn't a museum type situation.
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect. It was like a museum installation that we walked into, yeah. It's like if we had the body of Bjorn ourselves, like if we had like a mummified version of him, he'd be on display in like in like the Swedish museum or something like that.
Yeah, and that was one of the stark things that I noticed about the burial that took place here, aside from the taxidermy part, is it didn't seem like they put in anything of value into the grave. Yeah. I mean, there was, the whole painted ceiling and everything.
Yeah, and he had the sword and his horse, but beyond that...
Yeah, but beyond that, you would think that they would send him off to the afterlife with a lot of his other belongings, mm-hmm. Because one of the things in the Viking Age, too, was you went to the afterlife with whatever you were buried with and whatever you buried yourself and saved yourself.
Exactly, yeah.
During your lifetime. So it's kind of bizarre to me that was his resting place.
Yeah, like from a cultural perspective, like while it looked really beautiful and engaging and like, you know, had that ferocity to it of like, you know, this king that has died but is never really dead, like he can't be killed, you know, he's still standing there with his sword up. Visually it's awesome, but from a cultural perspective, he's a rather poor grave. Yeah. Like, lucky to be buried with a sword and a horse, and beyond that, there's nothing. Very bizarre, peculiar. It is really great to see, like, a burial mound, because I don't think we've really seen that in too many shows. Like, to have the proper mound and everything. But, yeah, just very inaccurate in terms of what was inside the mound, or how it will be presented, or anything.
They're playing Nefertafel.
Nice.
Yeah, I'd be a little terrified of that too.
I've been caught in a classic pincer? Oh no! Overdrawn. She punched with the shield!
She did!
She did! Look at that!
So, a lot of things already happening. A couple of deaths. Some grandstanding by armies. We already had a battle. I
am so interested to see what's going to happen with the ramshackle remnants of Oleg's army and Fitzurk and Ivar.
I am also really curious. I'm also curious if Ivar is actually going to return to England. I'm assuming he is because we're still waiting for him to go fight the armies there.
I mean, yeah.
Moving forward in the season, I want to see Ivar become a more interesting character. Because he still seems to be just kind of kicking around and not really doing too much.
Yeah.
I would love to see if we're going to catch up with Floki for the last time.
So there's a couple of plot lines that I'm really interested in. I want to get some answers.
Yeah, I want to see what they're going to do with them specifically. And like I said, you know, the pieces are already moving. They showed us a lot. A lot has happened already just in this first episode.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that this is the pace that they've set for the remaining 9 episodes of the season. Mm-hmm. And I'm really curious to see how they're going to wrap everything up after all of these decade.
Yeah. Ba-dum-bum-bum-bum. Ba-dum-bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum-bum-bum-bum, ba-dum-bum.
Ba-dum-ba-dum.
Ba-dum-bum-bum-bum. You, excuse, what? Who turned your sound on?
Thank you guys so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified of our future videos. And we'll see you in the next one.